Few people viewing the prototype of the new Panzer IV in 1936 could have known that they were looking at the machine which, when upgraded in response to the contingencies of war, would become the workhorse of the German army throughout the Second World War. As originally envisaged, the role of the Panzer IV was that of a support tank. It thus played second fiddle to the smaller and lighter Panzer III, which was planned to provide the backbone of the new Panzer divisions being formed in the late 1930s. Events were to prove that it was fortuitous for the Wehrmacht that, in designing the Mark IV with the larger hull and turret ring, they had created a machine with development potential not available in its stablemate. In consequence, the more numerous Panzer III was rendered obsolete as a battle tank by the end of 1942, the role being inherited by the Panzer IV. Production of the Panzer IV was initially low, so while examples were frequently seen in military parades in Germany, just 211 had been built by the time Hitler gave the order for the invasion of Poland, with these tank crews and their Panzer IVs seeing combat for the first time on the morning of the 1st of September 1939. Although the Panzer IV performed well in Poland, it was revealed to be under-armoured, a limitation shared with all German tank types employed in the campaign. The side armour of the Mark IV had proven vulnerable to the Polish 40mm Bofors anti-tank gun. Polish gunners had been inadvertently aided by targeting the Panzers by the German use of high-visibility white and yellow crosses and other tactical markings, which stood out in marked contrast against the overall standard body colour of very dark grey and provided excellent aiming points. The lesson was rapidly learnt, and many German tank crews obscured them by the liberal use of mud. Subsequently, the Model D, which came off the production line in October 1939, saw the thickness of the side armour increase from 15 to 20 millimetres. It had been Hitler's original intention to attack in the West as early as November 1939, but this date was cancelled, as were numerous others in the months ahead. Even though the winter of 1939-40 was extremely cold, the German army continued to prepare for the coming campaign. In this footage, taken on training grounds in the east of the country, Panzer IVs exercise with infantry in their allotted role as support vehicles, functioning as the enemy for the benefit of troops equipped with the 37mm anti-tank gun. When on the 10th of May 1940 the Germans opened their offensive in the west, Panzer IV numbers had increased to 280, accounting for about 1/9 of the total number of 2,574 German tanks fielded in the campaign. While the relatively small increase of 69 machines in service since September 1939 continued to reflect the still low level of production of the machine, there were nevertheless sufficient available to ensure that every tank unit in the campaign would field a Panzer IV medium tank company of between 6 to 11 vehicles. The rapidity with which France was defeated owed more to the tactical and strategical employment of German armour acting in mass and in concert with the Luftwaffe to paralyse and confuse the enemy than it did upon the superiority of German tanks. When operating within the mass of German armour, the Panzer IV proved effective in its intended support role, but on those occasions when tank clashes did occur, its limitations came to the fore, the low velocity of its 75mm gun proving unable to penetrate the heavy armour of either the French or British main battle tanks, the Char 1B bis and Matilda II. Even as German tank units overhauled their machines in the wake of the French surrender and all eyes turned to the opening of the Luftwaffe's air campaign against Great Britain, Hitler had voiced his intention of attacking the Soviet Union in 1941. Hitler ordered planning for the new campaign on the presumption that the armoured formula used to defeat France could be employed with equal success in the East. Although this campaign must inevitably be greater in scope, no attempt was made to accelerate war output, and especially tank production, in anticipation. Blitzkrieg provided the ideal means for Hitler, who wished to fight war on the cheap and not overstress the German economy. This is mirrored by Panzer IV production, just 322 being produced between July 1940 and May 1941, even though 223 of these comprised the up-armoured and improved Model E. When on June the 22nd, 1941, Hitler unleashed the Wehrmacht against the Soviet Union, the forces involved constituted the greatest land invasion in history. The cutting edge of the German drive eastward was the Panzerwaffe, tasked by Hitler to realize his primary requirement, that the Red Army be destroyed in a rapid campaign in western Russia before it could retreat into the depths of the country. On paper, the number of panzer divisions employed suggested that there had been a major expansion in the size of the tank arm. From a total of just 10 at the beginning of the French campaign, the army could now field 21 panzer divisions, of which 17 were committed to this new theatre of war. But, as we have seen, this expansion was not the consequence of increased production, but of a decision by Hitler in September 1940 to create new divisions by halving the size of the existing panzer divisions, reducing each to just one tank regiment and increasing the infantry component in compensation. This expedient went in the face of the accepted wisdom formulated in the 1930s, that to be fully effective, panzer divisions needed approximately 400 tanks. In 1940, the strongest panzer division had 300 tanks. Hitler's decision reduced the average strength of the 1941 panzer division to just 160 machines, which greatly lessened their effectiveness, in consequence laying the seeds for the ultimate failure of the tank arm in the wider war to come. Such considerations were not at all apparent as, in the 3 months following the opening of Operation Barbarossa, the German armoured divisions performed as expected. Thrusting rapidly and deeply into the Soviet hinterland, they netted vast numbers of Soviet prisoners and destroyed and captured colossal quantities of military equipment in great battles of encirclement. Of the total 3,322 panzers Hitler had committed to the invasion of Russia, just 438 were Panzer IVs. Although the numbers produced since the end of the French campaign were paltry, they nevertheless enabled each medium tank company to field at least 10 of these support tanks. It had not taken German tank crews or their superior officers very long to appreciate that the intelligence assessments of Soviet tank strength made prior to Barbarossa were far too low. Day in and day out, the Russians threw never-ending numbers of tanks against the Germans, in a desperate attempt to blunt the momentum of the panzer columns, slashing ever further eastward and deeper into Russia. Heinz Guderian had believed his pre-war assessment of the Soviet tank park at some 10,000 machines to be in all likelihood an overestimate. In reality, actual Soviet tank numbers was about double that figure. By far and away the bulk of this Soviet armour was decidedly obsolescent. The now shattered and hulked T-26s, T-28s and T-38s and tanks of the BT series that littered the roads, ditches and fields along the routes of the German advance provided mute testimony to the effectiveness of the guns of the panzers in penetrating the very weak armour protection of these machines. Even in the low-velocity weapon of the Stubbs, as the crews of the Panzer IV called their machines, was able to defeat the armour of these Soviet machines with ease. But this was certainly not true of the encounter between the panzers and the isolated